Gabe, say it slowly because there's a lot of details in it, but do we have what kind of evidence for our faith?
Empirical, objectively verifiable, observable, repeatable, and testable evidence. Kind of like how we have for evolution.
Okay, all right. So if you're going to require some sort of empirical evidence that we could go and verify with our senses using the methods of modern science in order to establish the truth of a claim concerning history, or the truth of a claim concerning an individual person who walked the face of the earth historically, then that would be a category mistake. We're not going to be able to give you any sort of empirical data that could compel your intellect to affirm the truth of these claims, as opposed to my claim being it's raining outside and you go and look, right? So that's just a category mistake of employing the wrong kind of tool in order to assess the truth value of a claim. Now, maybe you're coming from a position that the methods of modern science are the only tools we have in order to have real knowledge. And if that's the case, then we're going to have a conversation about what we call in philosophy scientism, that scientific knowledge is the only real kind of knowledge. That would be a bit of a problematic statement because that statement itself cannot be proven. The truth value of that statement couldn't be proven by using the methods of modern science. Therefore, it wouldn't be scientific knowledge. But I'm going to put that off to the side right now. And so specifically to answer your question is that we could employ the type of evidence that historians would look for in order to verify the truth of certain claims when we look at the historicity of the gospel narratives and employing the certain criteria like multiple attestation, enemy attestation, and criterion of embarrassment, and all of that stuff in order to assess the likelihood and reliability of ancient reports of ancient events, like in the case of Jesus. And whenever we do that research, right, this is just a sketch, by the way, Gabe, but whenever we do that research, in my judgment and many others, we come to the conclusion like this is historically reliable reports. And so given that the historical data is sound, it provides us reason to make the conclusion that Jesus is who he says he is. So that would be a sketch of sort of the approach that we would take to look at quote unquote empirical evidence, not that which you can verify with your own five senses, but the evidence that historians look to in order to establish the reliability of claims made in the past. Now, there is another approach that might be kind of what you're looking for that's a little bit closer home to the scientific evidence. And Gabe, I would invite you to consider the evidence from the miracles in the Catholic Church. And so, for example, you have the miracles of the saints. You know, every saint that's canonized and beatified, there are records of miracles, wondrous effects that have been brought about that can reasonably only be explained by divine power, that are specifically connected with their intercessory prayers. And so I'm thinking of, this is going to be one example in my forthcoming book on the intercession of the saints, and that is the healing of baby James Fulton Engstrom in 2010 in Peoria, Illinois, where he was born without any heartbeat and was in cardiac arrest for 61 minutes, over an hour between the time he came out the womb and at the hospital. And then all of a sudden, at the time when the parents started interceding for Bishop Fulton Sheen to pray, James came back to life, and his heart was beating with 148 beats per minute, like a healthy newborn baby. So that would be one example, Gabe, of an acclaimed miraculous effect due to divine power, and that's specific with a saint in the Catholic Church. And then you can also look to the miracles of the Eucharist, like the miracle of Lanciano, where you have what has been scientifically verified and tested to be human flesh and human blood in 1970 by Dr. Linoli, if I'm remembering that correctly. I can't remember his name. I'm going to have to research that. But in the miracle of Lanciano, that was verified, that was consecrated bread over 1,300 plus years. It changed in AD 700 to what empirically was verified to be human flesh and human blood, and was existing over 1,300 years. And so, Gabe, such an effect wouldn't compel the intellect immediately to conclude that Catholicism is true, but at least such testimonies of the miraculous could provide the intellect a reason, a justifiable reason, to conclude that Catholicism is true, along with all of the other evidence that we would have to look to concerning the historical evidence of St. Peter being the first pope and his historical successors and all that jazz. But the point here is that we can employ certain types of evidence that can provide the intellect rational justification to assent, moved by the will, to the proposition that Catholicism is true. So that's the approach, that's the sketch that we would employ in order to make good on that claim that Catholicism is true. Now, again, if you're not going to allow into the court of law, so to speak, right, on the witness stand, the historical evidence or the miraculous evidence because of your preconceived philosophical ideas, well, then that's where the conversation would have to start to see if we can remove some of those preconceived philosophical views that we would say would be flawed, and we would have to have the conversation start there before we move forward to assess any other kind of evidence.
You framed the miracle of Lanciano. I don't know if you called the atheist experience. Someone actually called about that last week, just to talk about it. But how would that prove that Catholicism is true?
Well, it wouldn't prove Catholicism is true in and of itself, because obviously the Orthodox believe that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist too. But my point here would be this would be a piece of evidence that would have to be employed to put in the pile of evidence, a converging set of evidences that are happening within the Catholic Church. And whenever you look at all these different lines of evidences in the Catholic Church, along with miracles of the saints, miracles of the Eucharist, and other things, right, all converging together, those different lines of evidences converging together within the Catholic Church would provide someone a rational ground to assent to the proposition that Catholicism is true. So I concede, I acknowledge that the miracle of Lanciano would not by itself prove Catholicism is true. I think it does provide really strong evidence that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist and the words of consecration and what's going on there. There's something mystical and real going on, as Orthodox and Catholics say. But it wouldn't prove Catholicism is true by itself. But it would be one piece of evidence along with other pieces of evidence taking place in the Catholic Church that could rationally lead someone to the conclusion that Catholicism is true. So that's how I would assess that.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this Catholic Answer, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out our live streams Monday through Friday, 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific. Or find the episode after on YouTube, your favorite podcast platform, or our Catholic Answers app.